is you're gonna contract with the seller, then you're gonna go find your retail buyer. Since we can't do an assignment, we're gonna change the contract from one to another. So then the buyer ends up contracting directly with the seller, and then you make the difference between those two.
You know, we're like Native Americans in a buffalo. We're gonna use every part of it. So when a lead comes in, we're gonna look at it and say, how can we split this up and how can everybody win in this situation? And until you understand all these exit strategies, you're gonna miss out, you're gonna leave a lot of waste, and somebody else is gonna come gobble it up.
Guys, welcome back to another episode here in this special Masterclass series that I'm doing with Tony Mont. Tony, this is really exciting because we're really diving in and breaking down all of your different exit strategies. And as we've been talking about in this series, it's really critical for you to really maximize your full potential as a real estate investor, as a transactioneer, or a wholesaler, anybody doing real estate deals, to have a thorough understanding of these different exit strategies. And so Tony's an expert in this. He specializes in his multi-million-dollar business on the exit side. And one of the things that Tony's been sharing and we've been talking about is the better you understand your different exit models, the better you can put together the right deal, because you know going into a deal now how to structure that deal so that it fits your ideal buyer, giving the seller situation, given the property, the market, all the conditions, so that you can really maximize the highest benefit from that property and make the most money from that deal.
Yeah, and all those things come into factor when you're looking at a deal on acquisitions and dispositions. Whether you're locking it up or you're getting rid of the deal, you need to know who your seller is, what their motivation is, what the property is like, what the market's like, what the market's doing right now, and who your end buyer is going to be. Is it going to be a fix and flip, a buy and hold, or a retail buyer, which is what we're going to talk about right now?
Yeah, so far up until now, all the exit strategies were focused on the investor. So
right.
it was either a flipper or a buy and hold investor, and we went through multiple models. If you guys missed those, go back and watch previous videos in the series. We put a playlist together. We're putting all these videos in there because we strategically are moving through your different buyers that you could take deals to. So we've covered now fix and flip, buy and hold, and now we've got a couple videos starting with this one where we're going to talk about taking the deal directly to a homeowner, an end buyer, right? A retail buyer. So if you hear us say retail buyer, homeowner, we're talking about somebody that's going to buy the house, not as an investment, but to live in the home.
Right. Yeah. And with the other strategies we talked about in previous videos, we're always talking to investors on the disposition side, right? Which is my arena and what I like to do, right? The negotiations are more fun and they're just kind of on the same wavelength as us in terms of real estate investing and how they see the market. But now our conversation differs because we're talking to agents and end buyers now. So you're no longer negotiating with an investor. This is somebody that's going to live in this home. So it's a little more empathetic on that side. And it's a lot more education when you're talking to an agent, because a lot of buyer's agents and listing agents, if you use one on a Novations exit, they're not super familiar with Novations. And when you use the term Novations a lot, they're going to just look at you with a blank stare.
They're going to be so confused.
So confused. It is confusing if they've never done it, because they're used to doing a regular transaction, just like every single deal you see on the MLS. But if you have to really educate your agents, either it's your listing agent, your buyer's agent, on this entire process, so everybody's on the same page from day one. Because if you don't explain that, you're not upfront with the process, and it goes with the seller too. You need to explain them the process so everything goes smooth. You got to be very transparent with this whole transaction, or it could blow up in your face.
And you make a really good point, because with a flipper, it's all about, well, what kind of profit can I make? With a buy and hold, it's all about, cash flow. With a homeowner, it's all about now use of the home. So you're going to wear a different hat. You're going to be looking at the property like, well, is this a desirable neighborhood? You're going to be thinking about all those types of things. What kind of condition is it in? Will it pass a mortgage inspection? Like, now you're wearing a different hat. You got to be thinking now, how would a end user look at this property, and can it qualify? Like, that's the way your mind now goes. So you have to be able to shift through these different exit strategies. So Tony, this is exciting because we're going to talk about Novations. Novations right now is kind of like the shiny object in the industry.
Right.
You hear a lot of people talk about Novations, and to me, and maybe you agree with this, Tony, it is a bit of an advanced strategy. So let's kind of maybe break down the big picture of like what a novation is if you've never heard of it. But just know, guys, that there are some moving parts here. The actual transaction itself, like the formula, is pretty simple.
Yeah, it's almost the most simple one.
It's really simple.
As we're writing it out, I'm like, there's not much to this, right?
Where it gets tricky is managing the seller through the whole process. If you do that wrong, it can blow up in your face. So there is a really good sales process that has to happen for a novation to go well.
Yeah, there's a sales process where you're very transparent in explaining the process and what value you bring to the seller with this strategy. But I would say the number one thing or two of the things I see ruin a novations deal is going to be not being transparent and upfront with your seller and your agents, and not having the right title company handle the transaction. If you don't have the right title company that's used to these transactions, I would say 100% of the time, it's gonna get screwy.
Yeah. So okay, Tony, so explain big picture, what is a novation and why would a deal make a better option as a novation over maybe one of our other exits?
Yeah, so novations is so to novate really means to replace. Yeah. So you have a purchase agreement with a seller, and now instead of assigning that purchase agreement over to an investor, you're actually gonna replace it with an offer to purchase from an end buyer. And you can now use FHA loans as an exit. You can use conventional VA, USDA loans and cash if you want. So it opens up every single retail buyer out there with any loan.
And why can't you just do an assignment to a retail buyer? Like, why couldn't we just do that?
Well, most lenders aren't going to take an assignment contract, right?
Yeah, so it's because the lender won't do it. And most retail buyers are getting a loan.
Yeah, most of them are. Yeah.
So it eliminates your ability to just wholesale an assignment directly to the end buyer.
Yeah.
So instead, what we're doing, guys, if you caught that, is you're going to contract with the seller, then you're going to go find your retail buyer. Since we can't do an assignment, we're going to change the contract from one to another.
Yeah.
So then the buyer ends up contracting directly with the seller, and then you make the difference between those two. The net between those two.
Yeah, you still make an assignment fee. There's still soft cost that gets taken out of it.
So in theory, you're wholesaling to a retail buyer. You're just doing it mechanically a little different.
You got to have your paperwork right. You got to have your process right to make sure these go smooth. Just like any shiny object syndrome, it looks really great and easy, from the first glance. But once you start doing them and dig into them, you're like, oh no, there is truly a process and the right paperwork I need in place to make sure this thing gets to the closing table.
Yeah.
And the reason we do novate instead of like doing a double close, which we'll talk about in another video, is because most lenders won't do a double close as well. You can't double close with an FHA buyer or VA buyer. You have to novate. So there's some conventional lenders that'll do double closes, but most of the time you're gonna have to novate this type of transaction.
And what would make a good novation if you're sitting down with a seller and you're looking at all your different exit opportunities? What would be a property and a seller situation where you would say, okay, of all my options, a novation is the best exit?
Yeah, novation properties are going to look like a move-in ready property where it doesn't need a ton of work, right? It might need to be cleaned up a little bit, but it doesn't need anything mechanical. It's a safe home to live in. And we actually pull a FHA type requirement because your FHA buyer is going to need the most requirements to lend on the property. So if your property that you're getting under contract meets all the FHA requirements for that loan, you can rest assured it's going to be a good novations deal. And the reason it's a good novations deal over these other exit strategies are you can get it at a good price where it's still a good deal on the MLS. It's in very livable condition. You're looking at the current market value, not the ARV. And with the novations, a lot of times when you're in these markets, if the current market value is 205, there's a lot of markets where rents in the area are only gonna be $1,500 a month or less. So it really doesn't make sense for an investor. They'd be upside down on a cash flow.
Yeah, so if you think about it, if the property's move-in ready, well, that's also a buy and hold. Like that's the same criteria for a buy and hold. We want to find a move-in ready for a buy and hold typically, also with a novation. So why would we do a novation instead of take it to a buy and hold investor, especially since the numbers are very similar? We'll show those in a minute, but the numbers are very similar. And did you catch what Tony said? He said, some markets doesn't make sense for a buy and hold investor because the rents are much lower, so it won't cash flow. So that eliminates that exit strategy of like a buy and hold investor because they can't cash flow, but it would make a good novation, right? So remember, guys, we're looking at the situation and you're asking yourself, of all my options for an exit, which one makes the most sense given this property and this seller situation? And that's, I think, the number one, because numbers wise, a novation and a wholesale to a buy and hold tend to be very similar.
Sure.
Similar numbers, similar type of property, where they both could fit.
Right.
But one might cash flow well and another one not, which then brings you to the novation.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to understand your market and understand the numbers, right? We keep talking about in all these different exit strategies. Like, we are using a lot of different exit strategies really because of the market too. What is the market telling us? It's all in the data. Yep. Like, what is the best exit strategy? Who's going to be our buyer for this deal? And if you don't know your market that well, then you're going to miss out on opportunities. And you know, for me, since we do this day in and day out on tons of deals, I can look at a deal within 5 minutes. I kind of see all this, right? It takes a while to get there. It takes a lot of reps of seeing a deal that way, but anybody can do it. You just got to practice it and get used to it. And then you can identify this within 5 or 10 minutes. Whereas, you know, we're talking on hours of videos to train this, but rest assured, if you start doing this in your business or if you're a one-man show, you're going to get this down really quick, right?
Yep. So Tony, let's break down now using that same deal example we've been using in previous videos and show, okay, well, this is what the numbers would look like. And then let's do a comparison to our other exits.
Right. So we're no longer looking for ARV or cash flow or anything like that. All we need to know is what is the current market value of the home, which I think is
as it sits
right now. Because I think that's way easier to run comps on than looking for an ARV, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's way more current market value properties out there than there are flips when you're looking at comps.
And all Tony means with current market value is just the as-is value. What will that home resell for without doing any work to it? Maybe clean it out and trash it out, but like without doing a renovation, look at comps now that are similar condition. What will that home sell for quickly? Because it's got to sell quickly too. So you want to make sure that let's maybe talk about that a minute. Like if it's sitting on the market for weeks and weeks, then this thing's going to not work.
Yeah, it's not a good deal.
What we do is we adjust it to make sure that it sells quickly.
Right. Yeah, we'll adjust it. We still want to be the cheapest thing out there so it sells fast. Because if the average days on market in your neighborhood you have this deal is 50 days, we're going to want ours to be really appealing to a retail buyer. So they'll buy it within the first, couple weeks or 30 days, right?
Yeah, our goal is 3 weeks.
Right,
have it under contract within 3 weeks.
Exactly. So with running comps on like as-is value, like we said, it's a lot easier to do because you're not looking for a needle in the haystack when it comes to ARV. It's really hard to kind of figure out what the rehab is when you're on the phone with the seller. It's really hard to find an exact property like ours that was flipped recently. Like that is a needle in the haystack. And that's why there's all these variations we talked about in the fix and flip exit with ARV and rehab and all that. And you got to leave yourself a big spread. But with current market value, like you said, most of the homes that are listed and most of the homes that have sold are just in as-is current market condition. So you're more likely to figure that out and an exact number of what your property is worth on the MLS when you're running comps. So it's much easier strategy that way. But we still have soft costs to it. So if our as-is value is $205,000 on this, we do have soft costs, and that's going to include commissions and closing costs. There's a little bit of room in there to have it be the cheapest thing on the market and a little bit of room in there to, maybe give a little bit of credit or a clean out. We leave room in there for those little incidentals is what I call them.
Typically what, 5,000?
Yeah.
Or maybe the buyer does an inspection and they give you a list of like 10 things and now you can give that as a credit to that buyer or a concession.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or lower the price a little bit. Like you want to have a little bit of buffer in that 10%. So you're taking 10% right off the top for soft costs.
Right. So if you look at, commissions at, 5 to 6%, closing costs at 1.5%, 2%, you're still giving yourself a little bit of percentage there for what we just discussed with having a little cheaper on the market and those concessions. So on this particular property, it would net out 185 if we sold it at the 205. So we take that net number of 185 and we still have to bake in our assignment fee. You're still gonna make an assignment fee on this deal, and we leave our assignment fee 40 to 25,000. So we give ourselves even a little bit more buffer on the assignment fee side of things because of what we talked about in the soft cost. You know, maybe something does come back in an FHA report that we have to fix. Maybe there was something, a safety concern we didn't see until the inspection, and now we have a $10,000 concession instead of a $5,000, something like that. So we like to give ourselves a little bit bigger assignment fee. These are a little bit more work on the back end. So our offer to this seller now is going to be $145,000 to $160,000, which, as you pointed out earlier, is pretty similar to our buy and hold offer to the seller. But remember, there's definitely neighborhoods and markets like this right outside of Raleigh where I'm at, where I see these exact numbers where a current market value is around those high 100s, low 200s. And you look at rents and the rents are really low, like $1,350. And it's like, why haven't these rents caught up to what's going on out here? They just haven't. So there really is no option for a buy and hold. You would have to get this super cheap if you ran your buy and hold numbers on it.
You'd be back in these numbers.
You'd be back in these numbers, right? And you know, there's probably not a lot of flips going on in this area. And even if there was, you're gonna have to get this so cheap for it to make sense. It would offend your seller to even give that offer.
You would miss the deal.
And then you would miss the deal if you didn't have another exit strategy.
So guys, remember here, this little part right here is these are the previous videos we did. So using this exact same deal, these numbers to a flipper, you'd have to buy it at 107 to 127. To take it to a buy and hold investor, we would be at 135 to 155. That would be the range, which look, that's fairly similar to the Novation. That's what you're saying. It's fairly similar. You're almost buying it at the same number to a buy and hold. But like you said, if the rents don't support this, then this isn't gonna work, whereas a Novation would. And then again, our creative is like through the roof because your terms are so good that you can pay crazy numbers for it.
Right.
But think about this. If they say no to a buy and hold, let's start here. If they say no to this number and they say no to this number and they don't want to do a Novation, then maybe you offer this one. Like you're just moving down the line of options to put a deal together.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to help you understand here is, how do I find the unique situation with the seller, with the property, and with the market? I think those are the three things we've identified, right? Yes. The seller situation, the property itself, and then what's the market doing? Yep. And you bring those three together, you understand multiple exit strategies, and you've got so many more options.
You do. And I love the point you just made where, you don't really know which offers are going to work on a particular property until you go through them. And you're absolutely right. Like on a Novations, maybe the Novations is the next step after a fix and flip and then the buy and hold or vice versa. So that's going to...
maybe you don't even offer that number because you just know it's not going to work.
Because it's too similar to your fix and flip number. Right. So yeah, you do go down the line and come up with strategies that work to make a deal happen with your seller and what offer works for them. So then you can exit this to whatever buyer you're looking at.
And here's what this sort of looks like. Like, let's say that, I offer this and they're like, no way, I gotta be way higher, or I have a loan, I can't go that low. So transitioning to here, it's so simple. You say something like this, you say, I might be able to pay a lot more if the seller, if you're talking to the seller or an agent, but if you seller would be willing to wait to get some or all of your money. Now, when you say it like that, it kind of triggers a response of like, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then you roll into, well, if I took over your loan, and then you roll into your creative offer. But it's so simple to just transition into that. Like they say, no, no, no. Well, you know what? I could pay a lot higher if you'd be willing to wait to get some or all of your money. And all you're doing is saying creative finance. Right. But you're saying it in a way to where you're transitioning now into the next phase. Or you might say, look, if we're going to come in and buy this property and we're going to have to do all of these improvements, that's why we need to be at this number. But this might work if we were to just rent the property out. So, and then you're kind of transitioning yourself into like, hey, we could pay a little bit more, but we would have to do a different strategy. And let's talk about this. And That's how you sort of anchor low and kind of work your way up.
Yeah, and it all makes sense, especially when you know what you're talking about and you know the numbers. That's why, as a closer, like if I'm calling myself a closer right now and I'm wearing those shoes, my whole strategy to get a deal is logic and numbers. And I'm breaking it down with the seller. Like that is my style and that's what I love. Like even this imaginary deal we've been doing over the last couple of days, like I'm getting all excited about it, even though it's imaginary, because I love the breakdown of a deal and I love the numbers and I love figuring that out.
Not everybody has that mindset about it. I do too. I feel like I'm going to win way more times if I help a seller logically understand why I'm at the numbers I'm at. Now, some people will tell you it doesn't matter because a seller doesn't care. It's all emotional to them. And there's no point in trying to logically explain why you're doing what you're doing. But I disagree. And maybe that's true in some cases, but by and large, I find most people are reasonable. And if you can help them conceptualize why you're at the number you're at, most reasonable people, they'll at least now consider what you're saying versus just shut it off.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like they trust you more when you really break down comps and numbers to them and show them in real time when you're on the phone with them, certain comps that sold for certain amounts and certain properties that are up for rent. And you're breaking down the investment. You're telling them, you're educating them about the way the market is right now, days on markets, interest rates, cost of money if we're going to flip it, cost of money if we're going to refinance it, and burn method.
And that is true, what you just said, using logic, every single time with agents. So if you're ever with agents, because that's their job. Their job is to understand what's going on. So like every single time with an agent, I want to convince that agent of why I'm at the numbers I'm at and why we're doing it this way. And I'm open to, like, I'll ask the agent, well, what do you think? And what are you looking at? And what do you think value is? And what do you think repairs are? Not that they're right or wrong, like not that I'm going to take what they say, but I want to see their perspective and I want to have an intelligent conversation about why we're doing what we're doing. Because if they're not on board with you about your numbers, they're not going to pitch it right. They're not going to get behind it. They're not going to sell it. They're going to just have resistance the whole time.
Right. And it's less, I feel like it's less pressure to the seller or the agent, whoever you're talking to, because you're not pressuring them into anything. You're not pushing on their emotional button. You're really just educating them.
The numbers are the numbers.
The numbers are the numbers. And then you're giving them the numbers, right?
Don't be mad at me, be mad at the numbers.
Yeah, it's less, it's less used car salesman type. And it's more like, what you're talking about. Like if you go to buy a car and you feel that pressure and you're asking about what horsepower does this car have? And the guy's like, I don't know, but it looks really cool, right?
Yeah.
And you really want to look cool in this car, as opposed to, hey, what's the horsepower in this? This has 347 horsepower. It's got the new motor. Like when you're talking to somebody that really knows the product, you feel less pressure and they're excited about the product and it makes you excited about it because they know about it. And I feel it's the same way in real estate.
I'll say, man, I'd love to give you that number, but help me understand where you're getting that number from. If I can get you that number and it makes sense, I'll totally pay you that number. But let's take a look at the neighborhood. And then all of a sudden you're showing this number and this number and this number, and they can't support that higher number, right? And so now, how can they be mad at you when the data is the one telling the number, the story?
They could be mad at the market and the data. They're not mad at you.
Like I'm mad at the data too. Like, man, look at this one here. It sold for 110.
Yeah.
Man, that one really, so now you're not the bad guy. The market's the bad guy.
Yeah. You're both like taking a deep breath about how bad the market is,
I'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this video today, right here where I'm recording at the Looking Glass Hotel and Event Center. Located in the heart of San Juan, Puerto Rico, just 10 minutes from the airport and walking distance to the best restaurants, shopping, and beaches, this newly renovated hotel is the perfect spot for meetups, events, retreats, and podcasting. So if you want to create an unforgettable experience, come to the Looking Glass Hotel and Event Center. Click the link below this video in the description for more details.
But we talked about it in an earlier video where, it's time and money, right? You either got time, you either got money. And I think you said it beautifully with the seller when you're transitioning into a Novation strategy, and or a creative strategy, I should say. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like, hey, if I can get you what you're asking, can you just give me a little more time to pay it off, right? It's that money time thing. Do you need money right now? If you do, the offer is going to be here, at the 107 to 127.
A Novation seller, you're going to need about 60-day window. So you would never pitch a novation to a pre-foreclosure where the auction's next Friday.
No.
Just, right? Or if they're like, I got to get my money out, if that moves you back down into the low cash category, right? But if the seller can wait the 60 days, then that's one of the criteria that we really look at heavily when you're thinking about your exits.
Right,
and that's, brought that up.
And that's a talk point we have with the seller when it comes to negotiating, where it's, hey, I did give you the offer of 127. That's my offer to close this cash in 30 days or less, right? But if I want to come up to your number, I'm coming all the way up to, our offer of 145 to 160. The trade-off is you give me a little bit more time, a little bit more access, and we'll get this thing closed out in 60 business days or whatever the market's telling you. And,
right. Because remember, guys, if you contract and it takes you 3 weeks to get a buyer under contract, and then it takes another 4 to 5 weeks or whatever to then close because they have a lender, that's a 60-day timeline.
Yes, yeah, it takes a while on some of these
deals. It could go
deals.
Longer if you don't get that buyer in the first couple of weeks. It could go a little longer.
It could go a little longer.
Sometimes FHA drag out. Sometimes those are 45 to 60-day closes.
Yeah, and
we've had that happen a lot.
Yeah, we've had that happen for sure. And one other factor in the novations is, man, we love them vacant, right? Because we can put a lockbox on there, we can get the buyers out there, showings easy. But you can still do a novations exit strategy, owner occupied or tenant occupied. Sometimes it does make the showings a little bit more difficult. We try to talk them into a lockbox that a licensed agent's going to be there. But sometimes you do have to schedule showings and open houses on the weekends, and that can delay the sale of the property as well. So vacant is always better, but our biggest novations deal we ever did was $168,000, and that was owner occupied. Yeah. So you can still do them, but sometimes it makes the time frame a little bit more difficult.
And you can novate cash only deals too.
Oh yeah.
Because the point is you're getting it back on the MLS.
Right.
Right. So guys, I hope a novation is another tool in your toolbox. That's all it should be. You may not build your entire business around novations. I know some people do. We don't. We just want to have another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, we want another offer to give to the seller before we give up on this deal, right? We are, we're like Native Americans in a buffalo. We're going to use every part of it. So when a lead comes in, we're going to look at it and say, how can we split this up and how can everybody win in this situation? And until you understand all these exit strategies, you're going to miss out. You're going to leave a lot of waste and somebody else is going to come gobble it up.
Yeah, and we've got some great resources, guys. I have a Novation kit with some great scripts and some paperwork and stuff. We'll give that to you for free. I forget what the link is. We'll put it on the screen here or in the description, so you can get that as a resource to help you, with your novation. One of the things I recommend is team up with someone that will JV with you. Like I know you guys might do that, and reach out to Tony, or I'm friends with Rich Wonders and he'll JV. There's people in the industry that will JV with you on your novation deals so that you can maybe learn as you go on the first couple.
That's a great, that's a great point, because, not everybody's going to have the proper paperwork and the right relationships with the title companies that you're going to need to get this closed out. And we talked about it in another video about that greed and that ego. Give that up to learn. If you can split a deal with somebody and get the proper paperwork and the proper process and a contact at a title company, your first 2 or 3 deals, you might give up half your assignment fee, but how much did you learn with that? You can't pay for that in college. You can only pay for it in this industry. Yeah,
totally agree with that. And guys, I'm going to put in the description some links to follow Tony if you're not already. I'll put his social in there. He also does some great training on how to do all these different exit strategies. He has a membership too, where he'll get on the phones and you can watch him and he'll show you how to do this and train you as well. So we'll put those in the description below too. And guys, we're just really grateful for you. Thanks for joining us in this whole series. There'll be a playlist as well. And guys, we're looking forward to another video, and we'll see you on the next video.